So our goals today are to first deepen your understanding of English learner students' progress toward reclassification, and I'll be sharing some findings from a very recent study that's just been released around students' time, how long it takes students to become reclassified, and the characteristics that relate to that. In talking about this goal, we'll be talking about it on two levels. So one level is around implications for instruction. So I see many of the participants today are ESL teachers or bilingual education teachers. So I really hope to, in talking about our findings about students' progress, to talk a little bit about what the instructional implications of that progress is. The second goal, though, is that, the second piece of thinking about English learner students' progress is around bigger issues around policy, particularly as we move into an era of transitioning from No Child Left Behind to the Every Student Succeeds Act. I see that at least a few of you are representing state educational agencies and are probably intimately aware of the changes that are coming into play with ESSA, the Every Student Succeeds Act, as it comes to transition from No Child Left Behind. And I'm sure many of the teachers participating also are curious in how that will play out. We know that ESSA has changed a number of things and has given states a lot of flexibility in how they think about accountability and various sort of dimensions of how we serve our students. And there's certainly some opportunities for ESSA to improve the ways that we think about, measure the progress of English learners. So as I talk about the results, I'll say a little bit about what that means. And I'll encourage folks to ask questions about those as well if you have other kinds of questions about how this might relate. The second big goal, and this will be more the second half of today's session, is to learn about 4 research-based recommendations to teach academic content and literacy to English learner students. So these recommendations draw on another piece of work I was involved in with a panel of national experts thinking about the best practices and best instructional things you can do to accelerate students' progress toward English language proficiency as well as toward mastering academic content. So the first section today is talking about this question of how long students take to become reclassified. This comes from a report that, as I mentioned, has just recently been released, and you have access to it, the report itself, under the Download Today's Resources box on your screen, and I'll say a little bit about that report. So the context for this study is that it's probably not news to anyone in this room that U.S. schools are increasingly linguistically diverse. We have many more English learners in our classrooms, and we have English learners in classrooms and in schools where they weren't always, that are new destinations for English language learners. One challenge we've had in the past is that we haven't had high-quality longitudinal data sets that look over time, but recently, by having more access to these kinds of rich longitudinal data, it makes it possible for us to look at patterns in reclassification of English learner students as they become former English learner students. In the past, we've had sort of one snapshot in time. We've looked at maybe how many students are reclassifying 1 year, or looking retrospectively at our former English learners and seeing how long it took them. But we can now actually have better answers to these questions because we can look longitudinally over time. And then the other piece of context that is important is that as we understand reclassification a little bit better, it can inform policy and practice. As I mentioned, it can inform state and district policies on how we think about when to reclassify students, as well as policies around how we can think about more meaningful accountability at the state and school level for students' progress toward English language proficiency. In the past, under No Child Left Behind, students' progress toward English proficiency got a little bit ignored or became sort of put on the back burner sometimes as we had so much focus on the reading and math tests. I think under the new ESSA legislation, we have some opportunities, though the devil will be in the details, about how well states and schools are going to be held accountable for students' progress toward English proficiency. It can also help school-level decisions about which groups may require particular different types or particular services of instructional support. So our 2 big questions in this study were, first, on average, how long do English learner students take to become reclassified as former English learner students? Seems like a relatively simple question, but actually it's a little bit complicated and requires this long-term longitudinal perspective. The second question is, how does this time to reclassification differ by particular student characteristics? And the three that we were most interested in are first, their grade of entry into New York City schools, which wasn't always their grade of entry to the U.S., though in many cases it was. Second, their initial English proficiency when they came into school. And then finally, their disability status, particularly focusing on specific learning disabilities and on speech and language impairments, to disability groups that are most related to the questions around language and how that may play out in their reclassification process.